You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hi. Okay, so today I'm joined by Dr. Ilene S. Cohen, a psychotherapist, author, and mom of two. She is also one of the most respected voices in the psychology of people-pleasing and navigating the difficulty of living an intentional life while trying to maintain fulfilling relationships. She is the author of 5 books. You might know her most famous book called When It's Never About You. And her newest book that's out now is Anxious for Answers. She's a regular contributor to Psychology Today with dedicated readers numbering in the millions. Her books and therapy practice are fueled by a passion for helping people achieve their goals, build a strong sense of self, and lead fulfilling and meaningful lives. So today I obviously asked Dr. Ilene to take the deepest dive with me into people-pleasing. I want to know what it is. I want to know where the behavior comes from. I want to know what the consequences are of living this way, especially long term. And then, of course, I want to know how we heal and move on. So we talk about that and more. Of course, self-care makes an appearance, anxiety, burnout, ambition, and all related to motherhood and family. So here's Dr. Ilene, and of course, stay tuned after my final thoughts. Hi, Dr. Ilene. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to talk with you. I feel like in some ways I've had a conversation with you because I've spent the last few days just completely immersing myself in your work, and I have so many questions, so I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you, and I hope I answer them to your liking.
Yeah. Well, that being said, I think I would just love to hear from you first and foremost, just as a baseline for this conversation. How do you define people-pleasing?
So people-pleasing is when anybody might manage their own anxiety of maybe displeasing others or, not feeling like they are accepted by others. And as a way to manage anxiety, they may focus on others and what they want from them versus themselves. So that's really the process behind a lot of people pleasing. It might look different to different people, and we can discuss that. But behind that is really people pleasing as a way to manage our own discomfort around displeasing others.
So we're avoiding ourselves, basically.
And it's a lot of the times it's subconscious, and we can discuss where it might derive from, but we're doing in the moment maybe not what we would like to do, but whatever makes us feel more comfortable in that moment, which might be to just kind of get the cue from the other person and go according to what you feel might please or make that person happy versus your own self.
Okay. And so I feel like in some ways, and I've experienced this, when I'm battling something to do with my mental health in some way, I'm struggling, I often find that putting a title on it helps me process and helps me then deal. But I feel like sometimes the true terms for what someone is going through can also sometimes maybe deter someone from actually exploring that they may or may not be suffering from something. So, when I hear people pleasing, and I think when generally people hear people pleasing, they think, oh no, I don't do that, or um, it's met with a negativity. It's met with an initial stigma, maybe that they might not be a strong person, or that they don't have a voice, things of that nature. But that's not always the case. And so I'm wondering if someone's listening and they've never before thought to identify themselves with people pleasing tendencies, behaviors, characteristics, what are some questions they might ask themselves or behaviors they can start to look out for that might reveal themselves to be along those lines?
Well, first I'd say I hear that, and I hear that from them. I don't love labels either, and I would never tell someone if they came to see me, oh, you're this or that.
Mm,
I utilize the language to kind of help put it in a box
right.
to then allow people to have a language around it. And there's tons of, approval seekers, or one of them perfectionism. There's lots of words for it, but I think it's fine if someone doesn't want to identify as something. I would just pay attention if you're noticing that you're resentful in your relationships, or you don't feel like you can speak up or have your opinion, if you're scared of people's reactions to
Mm,
you, if you're overly focused on others and their lives versus your own, if you're, anxious around trying to have everything like perfect instead of just like trying to do your best. Um, if you're maybe if you're feeling overwhelmed or burnt out. So there's a lot of things that you might notice in your own life that aren't working for you. And you don't have to title it, but maybe, okay, this isn't working now. How can I make changes?
mm,
And one of those might be to say, okay, maybe I am having a tendency towards people pleasing or focusing on others, or I'm more concerned with approval than I am with kind of doing what I want to do or what feels right to me.
yeah. And as you're talking and listing those out for me, I appreciate that. I I'm thinking of how many moms, how many women are just going, well, yeah, obviously. That's life. I mean, where do we start to maybe draw the line or start to understand the difference between sort of facts of life versus becoming an issue?
Well, it comes down to people really only want to make changes or can make changes when they're super uncomfortable.
Hmm.
So, I see when people come to me, or then I talk about people pleasing because I had suffered from that for many years. It's really when your back is up against the wall and it's not working.
Mm.
When you really don't feel like you're getting any satisfaction from your relationships, or you're totally exhausted, burnout, you're not finding joy in anything anymore. There's something, they might not know what's going on yet, but something doesn't feel right. They might feel depressed, down, very
Mm.
anxious. And these are all signals. And in therapy or through reading, if you kind of slow down and observe and start unpacking your life, you might start noticing, like, oh, hey, I'm doing always for others. I'm so focused on what they want. Maybe you might feel that they're not appreciative, or that you don't get anything in return, um, and that the relationships aren't working for you anymore. And you might think that that's everybody else in your life, or people are just like that. But when we slow down or talk in therapy or read, you might say, okay, how am I contributing to these behaviors and these relationships? And what
Mm.
can I do to make changes? Am I not focusing on my own life? Am I not speaking up for myself? Do I not have a voice or an opinion because I'm too scared of conflict?
Mm-hmm.
Is this something I need to work on? Am I seeing it in all areas, like workplace? Am I taking on too many tasks? Am I doing it at home as a parent? Or I'm feeling overwhelmed with my family and thinking I need to do it all on my own. I think that's something pleasers always think, oh, I need to do everything by myself. And then if I'm overwhelmed or tired, there must be something wrong with me.
Yeah.
So if you think that you're the problem, so there's a lot of ways that it might show up in your life. And I think just being uncomfortable is one, whatever it is from what I was talking about. There's different ways to feel uncomfortable. Those are signals to slow down and take a look and say, okay, what's going on here, and how am I contributing to this, and how can I make changes.
Yeah, it's funny because as you're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, it makes sense. People pleasers will sort of take on, the bulk of whatever they feel is the workload, whether it's actually at work or at home or in their relationships. But people pleasing in itself, the words themselves require interaction amongst more than one person. So it's funny that a term used to describe how someone will react to others actually can often bring them to just taking on so much on their own.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know.
And
I'm
focusing,
just
and the
processing that.
focus is so much on other people, and making
Hmm.
them comfortable, making them feel good, that you might be taking on too much other people's roles, their
Yeah.
tasks.
Yeah.
And then I see a lot of burnout, feelings of overwhelm and stuff like that. It definitely seeps into a lot of different areas of your life.
Yeah. So, can you take a few minutes now, maybe, and talk to someone who's hearing this and either thinking, well, I'm the caretaker for my family. There's nothing wrong with it, or this is just how it is. And you've mentioned burnout, you've mentioned, stress and things, but I imagine there is quite a spectrum of possible outcomes of this prolonged behavior. Where are the possible dangers of actually doing this over the course of your life or in certain areas of your life?
There's a lot of consequences to it, and I would say, hey, if it's, working for you, or it's fine, don't fix it if it ain't broke. But for me personally, and a lot of my clients, it just got too hard. I felt like I was surrounded by a lot of people that just were taking from me and taking my time, and I didn't feel the strength to have boundaries. A lot of people in my life were offended by boundaries.
Mm.
So I felt very overwhelmed. And when I started going to school and making my own life, it was very hard for me to balance trying to educate myself, have my own life, and feel like I was taking care of everybody else. And the problem is that when you are taking on everybody else's stuff, it's not like you're really problem solving and it's done. There's always going to be more things you're going to have to do, because those people aren't learning how to deal with their own lives
Mm.
and their own stuff. They're going to you when they're anxious, and there's different types of people. There's people that when they're anxious, they were like the rescuers, quote unquote, and they go and they're like, I got this. They got the energy, and that's usually what we would call pleasers. And there's others that kind of freeze and they're like, oh, I don't know what to do.
Mm.
And they look to others to help them and help manage their anxiety around those tasks. So what you find is that the tasks just keep getting more and more, and you have to keep stepping in,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not taking responsibility for their lives. You're taking it. And then you also, when you start wanting to create your own life, it becomes too much to try to balance. Especially if maybe there's a big life shift, if someone passes away in the family, or if there's a trauma, or there is just trying to, you want to change your careers, any kind of shift can make something that seems like it's working kind of crumble.
Mm.
So if I didn't want to maybe create my own life, become a doctor, and do my stuff, maybe people pleasing status quo and always for others might have been okay for some time, until there was somebody that passed away in the family. Then everybody looks to you to plan the funeral, get it all together,
Mm.
take on that role. So things might work for a while, but the different stressors in life might bring things to the surface that really aren't working, that you think are.
Mm-hmm.
So
It
I
almost
would say you pay attention to that.
it almost sounds like you're just sitting on a ticking time bomb. At some point,
potentially it's going to go off because something in life is going to change. And like you said, whatever the status quo was, it seems almost inevitable that it will change at some point.
Right. Like, for example,
And
let's
then
take
we're in
this
chaos,
pandemic.
right? Like then we're in panic.
Right. Then you're overwhelmed and tired and burnt out and stressed. And then you think, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I handle all this? And we'll take, for example, the pandemic. Yes, the pandemic is a very big stressor and it's an unfortunate situation. But it's not only that, it's that it's going to bring up things that were already there that we weren't taking a look at. So if you're, say, a big people pleaser always doing, and then now, everyone in your family's super stressed out, someone lost a job, or everybody's at home, um, things might start, it might bring up things that were already
Mm-hmm.
there, but this extra stressor topples it over. And that's where I think this has been my busiest time ever as a therapist.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything new that was coming about. It's just that this pandemic brought it to the surface. And for pleasers, say like a mom or a stay-at-home parent, they saw, okay, wow, like I don't have my resources that I usually have, or I don't have school or this and that. But now I'm seeing in my relationship that really my spouse isn't carrying their weight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing everything, and even though that the family, the kids are at home, I'm still doing everything. And you also notice that people aren't so grateful about it either. That's when I get a lot of clients when they just feel underappreciated, because I think pleasers could keep on going if someone just said thank you. And I say, in a way, it's a blessing in the disguise if the person's ungrateful, because it can give you the fuel to actually make those changes. It's kind of like that's a drug. I used to get high on the thank you, you're so
Right.
awesome.
Right.
I'm like, oh, thanks. I'll help you all day long. But it was the people that I felt were less, grateful, still never seemed appreciative or happy. That's when I was like, you know what, I really need to make changes in this behavior, because no, it just doesn't feel good anymore, and I feel burnt out and nobody's happy anyway. So I might as well shift that focus to myself
Mm-hmm.
and put that energy towards my own life versus trying to please people that just don't seem like they can be pleased. So I think that in a way it is a blessing in disguise when people aren't as grateful as you'd hope.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to decide which direction I want to go first, and perhaps I'll start here. Do you then find generally that pleasers are more so women than men?
I mean, just in my practice, I see more women, and I think it's cultural too that women have been seen as the caretakers to take it all on, but it definitely doesn't have a gender.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a behavior process of a way that we've learned to manage our own anxiety. Um, I think that we might see it more in women, but it's definitely men can also be pleasers.
And how, I guess, just since I am a woman, how
Mhm.
how would you see it perhaps manifest itself in just say a heteronormative relationship in the man in whatever, whether that's a romantic relationship or a work relationship. I mean, I can think of 1,000 examples how that's going to show up for a woman in that stereotypical role. Can you give any examples of how that might reveal itself in a man that maybe wouldn't be so obvious, or just in general?
Well, someone that might take on the emotional stuff if they feel like the spouse. I see a lot with couples that, they take it on that they want to be the one to help make their spouse feel happy
Mm,
or make sure they're always having a good time. They might overspend on things, because the typical male role of being,
mm-hmm,
the breadwinner. So they might, overspend or buy things for the household to kind of to make up for some things.
mm,
Um, And I have seen, men too doing their more than their share, not only in the emotional but in the household, and focusing on what they can do for others versus for themselves, and they get uncomfortable when others are uncomfortable.
Mm,
That's really the underlying.
mm,
So if they notice their spouse just, but they tend to, and I'm just
of
generalizing,
course.
try to, make others happy through financial means,
Right.
and maybe planning things,
Mm-hmm.
versus household stuff. But again, that can, and women tend to show their caretaking, through doing more of the physical things in the house or the family, and stuff like that. But that's just a gross generalization. I would say the process, just anybody that's really focused on other and ignoring their own kind of inner voice,
Mm-hmm.
and doing things and taking on that responsibility, for others' well-being,
Yeah.
and taking personally their discomfort with things or their criticism of things, that's all in the people pleasing arena.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was getting, the phrase just that kept popping in my head was, perhaps just the idea that the male figure, the father figure, the husband has to be the rock of the family, right? Like you know, has to be the strong one, so to speak. Like in itself, that could kind of be people pleasing, trying to make sure that while the the wife and the kids are, kind of dealing with the development and the raising and the all of the emotional stuff that they have to kind of maintain this sort of neutrality that might not feel actually in their inner being as authentic.
Right.
Yeah. Um,
Right.
you said, I just want to reiterate, uncomfortable when others are uncomfortable. I think that that's a really great way of really understanding it. And so I just wanted to repeat that. And I think going back when I said there were a couple of directions I wanted to go, when you're talking about perhaps people are ungrateful or not appreciative, what was coming up for me is that it doesn't always have to be an outward showing of being ungrateful. Like it can, and I guess I should just speak from my own experience, right? So I I'm a wife, I'm a mom. I was just in therapy this morning kind of talking about how on occasion my husband will go away for the weekend. His friends don't really live nearby, so he'll go and spend time with them, and I'm taking on the load of the house and the two kids by myself for a weekend, and I know he appreciates it. But I don't know that he knows that I actually need to hear it like every time. And so I guess I just want to bring that up and clarify that I'm trying to make this really relatable, to someone who's maybe listening like me or like someone else that's going, well, my husband's not a jerk or my partner's not a jerk, and they're not actually being rude or they're not actually saying I don't appreciate what you do, but it's more so what you might be feeling from your own perspective and sort of projecting onto them. Do you get what I'm saying? Am I making any sense and connection to what you're talking about?
Yeah, and I say, listen, each couple, just because one person in the couple might take on to more than the other doesn't mean it's people pleasing. If both of you
Mm,
are in agreement and it's fine with you, like I know that my partnership, and I'm going to be doing most of the work with the family and kids,
yeah.
and he does his part of other things, and that works for us as long as it's a conscious decision made between both. It
Mm,
becomes an issue, say, if you're really resentful and you don't want him to go away and you prefer him to stay home,
mm-hmm.
and you're just saying, okay, just to make him happy, but you really aren't happy with it.
Right.
But if it really is okay with you, and you take that on for the weekend, or maybe you take turns, or you just know he needs more time for himself, like I know personally my husband needs a lot more time for himself than I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, and I see he's in a better mood. He comes home, you know, I don't mind that he golfs. I tell him, go ahead, go golf on Saturday. Just like have a family member come over to be with me for the day. You know, you figure
Right.
that part out. But if that's what you need and you come home and you're in a good mood, go ahead, enjoy yourself
Yeah.
versus, you know, staying home. And it works for all of us because we discussed it versus if I was like really didn't want him to go and I was struggling and it doesn't matter, the thank you or the appreciation isn't gonna help if really it's something you prefer not being to happen. You're just doing it because you don't want conflict
Yeah.
or you know things like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And just in case he listens to this, I really am okay with it. And I think I resonated with what you said about he does, you know, he comes back in a better mood. He comes back rejuvenated. He's had that socialization with his friends and that sort of let loose feeling, you know, and that definitely benefits our whole house when he comes back from that. But also what I was hearing there, and this was a question I had for you, but I think you might have just answered it, that it sounds like the difference between, just to speak very in those terms, you know, people pleasing and say just compromising and living life is communication.
right, communication's a big part, and knowing no you having you know a part in the relationship, a voice, you know, time for yourself. You're actually doing things that make you happy as well,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just always for others and having that focus on you, but also it's you know we call it in therapy differentiation of self, where you have a self but you're also connected to the people in your life, so
Mm-hmm.
having that balance. And I think there's the pleasers are very focused on others and they totally lose themselves. um so yeah, definitely communicating, knowing, and just being more conscious and aware, and it's not being automatic. A lot of people pleasing behaviors are automatic. Just like being more thoughtful about things, and then you'll find that later you'll have stronger relationships because you're not feeling resentful, you're not feeling like people are using you or not appreciative
Yeah.
or things like that.
Mm-hmm. And so, where are some potential roots of this behavior? Where is it coming from?
Well, everybody's different, and just as human beings, we have like some natural set ways in us. But just like I wouldn't say it's across the board, but just from my own experience and then research that I've done is that it's it arises mostly if you have like strong parental figures that are very reactive as a child and you might have been uncertain. So whenever you maybe like brought up your own voice or you rebelled against something, you were shut down or overreacted to. Another time is if there's a lot of siblings or there's an alcoholic parent or something, or a disabled child. You didn't want to be an extra burden to the family.
Mm.
So you quiet your own voice. These are all just natural ways we learn to manage our anxiety around our family system or school system or whatever it is. Like when you're younger and you're not fully developed yet, you're doing what you need to do to survive in whatever environment you're in.
Mm.
So you, at some point, like me, got the cue like, okay, if you don't want to get punished, if you don't want to get yelled at, if you don't want to be criticized, you better keep quiet
Mm.
and you better be perfect. And that's kind of what happens. If for I have a lot of clients with like alcoholic parents, and they say, well, the focus was so much on making sure that you know mom or dad didn't drink. We had to be perfect because if we did something wrong, we were scared that that person would drink or use. So it's really just behaviors learned for survival purposes to try to manage your anxiety around an anxious system. It becomes, I guess, an issue later in life because you're continuing to have that pattern of behavior throughout your relationships. And it might have worked when you were younger to kind of keep things less anxious. But the only time people really make changes is when they start noticing it's not working for them anymore. And what can we do to make changes now? Because it's actually making us more anxious.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, oh, how heavy that experience must be for obviously the kid going through it at the time, but then having to potentially, unpack that again as an adult. Um, are there connections between people pleasing anxiety and abuse?
Yeah, of course. And it doesn't even have to be like severe abuse, like, we consider. It could just be well, it is severe to neglect, but it could just be parents never validating your experience.
Hmm.
It could be yelling and screaming. There's a lot of things, and some of my clients are angry at first, and I think a lot of people have the misconception that, okay, it's our parents' fault, and we need to now have this big, backlash with them and get after them about all the things that they did. But a lot of this is multi-generational,
Hmm.
and everybody, we all are doing the best we can, and even our parents are doing, the way they're doing things to manage their own anxiety, whether it's drinking, yelling, getting angry. And or you might see a parent pleasing themselves, one parent that's more, dominant, and the other one that's more submissive and more the pleasing partner. And then you kind of see that and continue that pattern. It is just important not to look at your past to blame anyone, but to see how the patterns developed and see what part you're playing in it and make changes. But of course, that might bring about anger, hurt, sadness. Um, but it can also shed light to help people get more objective of the relational patterns and what they can do to break those patterns. Because two things happen if you're somebody that tends to go towards pleasing to manage your anxiety. One is you continue that in all your relationships, and you might match up with people similar to the people of your family who you have unresolved issues with.
Hmm.
And another is you might go the complete opposite. You might, get so fed up with that and reactive that you shut everybody out of your life,
Hmm.
and you become angry. And that's not useful either. So, in therapy, yes, it's unfortunate that we got to unpack things that aren't necessarily our faults. But as we get older, we say, okay, what's my responsibility now? And how can I change my relationship patterns so I can help my future generations, if I choose to have, and make better relationships? Because what happens is if we repeat patterns, is we keep seeing the same.
Yeah.
So we might have children that are either we feel are very demanding of us or that are also exhibiting pleasing behaviors. We might have a spouse that we feel is never grateful. So, these things don't just stop unless we're consciously aware and make changes.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that is one of the biggest, ahas or breakthrough moments of therapy that I had was sort of being able to shift the narrative in my head of almost like doing the inner work, the the soul searching and the unpacking as this burden, like, why do I have to be the one to do it? Why isn't my partner also doing this? Why aren't my family members also doing this? And then as it starts to happen, it really becomes something, at least in my experience, that becomes empowering. And you start to see, I should speak for myself, I started to see how my work was benefiting the other people in my life, my relationships with them, or just our overall household. And then it's like, oh, what a gift. Oh, this is
Right.
so nice. Of course, why wouldn't I do this for the people I love? And I think that's unfortunately one of the biggest, I mean, I don't know. It took me a little bit of time to get over that. And I wonder if that is also what maybe potentially stops people in the first place from exploring deeper, because it is a lot of work.
For sure, and it's very uncomfortable. I mean, people
Yes.
think they are going to come to therapy and feel good, and really,
Yeah.
when you're doing the real work, it doesn't feel so good at first, and it's uncomfortable to change.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of the times we focus on others and we hope they change.
Hmm.
Um, but when really, in therapy, we're shifting that focus to ourselves and making hard behavioral changes. And not only when we change, then, which is hard, we're going to have different responses from people in our lives too.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of people, unless they don't change or they don't go to therapy, unless they're really uncomfortable, because you got to be really uncomfortable to actually dive into this discomfort of change. But as you were saying, once you start making those changes, awareness, there's a freedom to it.
Yeah.
It's like training or, any type of hard work towards something. There's benefits at the end, but nothing good comes easy, for sure. It's not easy at all. And I always say, and I write in my stuff, like, if I wasn't that uncomfortable, if I wasn't given those life experiences, I would have never changed.
Yeah.
It was too hard,
Mm-hmm.
but it was just too hard not to. So that's really where the shift happens.
Yeah, I often I often have to be reminded by my own therapist that I am a human being and I'm going to feel things because often, I think that there's a lot of emphasis, at least that I've placed in my life, on preventative measures, how do I do this or that to prevent feeling this way again? And she's always like, listen, you're going to feel that way again and again and again. The work we're doing here is so that you can cope with the feeling and, start to identify where it's coming from and what you can do about it. I think for me, that was almost a misconception about therapy, was that it's going to help me just like not feel like,
Right.
just
And
so ridiculous now that I know, but
well, and that's what we've been taught, don't you, when with kids, oh, don't feel that way, you're fine. Oh, don't be sad, don't be this. And a lot of the times our feelings aren't validated. And as pleasers or people focused on others, we're really just ignoring our own feelings about stuff.
mm-hmm.
And we're not validating our own experiences. And that's really part of our bigger culture. And until like we start seeing it's not a weakness and our experience is our experience. I have tons of clients who are like, is it okay I feel that way? And I'm like, well, is that your experience? Your experience is never wrong.
Mm.
Your feelings are never wrong. It's okay. Let's say, okay, this is now, what do I want to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
What is it telling me, or do I have to work through it? Instead of reacting to our feelings, really paying attention to them, validating them, and then deciding what we want to do. Because it is part of the human experience. I think that so much of us want to ignore and we think is such a horrible thing, but really it's a blessing in the end.
Yeah. When you start to see the results or you start to get on the other side, I don't even know if I want to phrase it this way, but for lack of a better way, it's like it makes it worth it. And then I start to feel like I start to wonder how people get through life and enjoy it without going to therapy or without really unpacking everything that they've been through, because it's so meaningful. It's I don't know, I just keep going back to empowering. I just feel so much more secure in who I am and where I'm going.
Right. No, me too. I don't know either. I see people.
I'm like, how do you do it? How do you?
Yeah, they're just walking around carrying this stuff they don't realize and doing destructive behaviors to manage their anxiety and looking to others. But for sure, but I think there is this big awareness now, and people are educating themselves, and we are in a generation that's more, conscientious and trying to make those changes. But, like I said, people are going to keep just doing what they're doing until they get that level of discomfort. And listen, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean they're going to have a bad life or
Right.
anything like that. Just everybody, I guess, has their own journey of how far they want to take it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for sure.
So I want to, I guess, go back a minute and about whether it be people pleasing or anxiety, and just give you a chance to perhaps I know you've already said a lot here, but as far as the healing process and the transformation work, is there anything that you haven't said already that you want to make sure we say here about how someone could start that process, or what that healing process, that transformation process would start to look like?
Sure, I would say that, like we were talking about with feelings, if you notice that you're like feeling down a lot, overwhelmed, burnt out, to slow down and to start
Mm-hmm.
really paying attention. Don't just try to get rid of those feelings or dive into something that's gonna give you immediate relief. Just observe. Don't try to change anything. And look, I think the most wisdom comes from our own selves. And
Mm-hmm.
I always tell clients, I'm not, the expert. You're the expert in your own lives. You're bringing me this, the information from your life, and I'll help guide you from my expertise and knowledge. But I think people start noticing and seeing really what the problem is when they slow down, take more of an observable stance and non-judgmental, and take a look at how they're functioning in their relationships and their families. And then they can make once they do that, they can calm themselves down and decide, what do I want to do with this? Do I need to seek help? Should I pick up a book? Can I take care of this on my own? But I think it all starts with observing and slowing down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, it's one, and being, I think you have to kind of prepare to for what you're going to observe. Like I remember my mom used to counsel me in some way when I was dealing with, middle school drama and this or that. And she'd say, if you're going to, however you're going to approach a situation, be prepared for either outcome. If you want to, confront these girls who are being mean or whatever, be prepared for either them to be mean back or to not be friends with them. Like, just kind of prepare yourself. And I'm, that comes to mind because I think it can be particularly daunting and a little bit scary even to think about, to start to observe yourself, because we have this idea of who we are, and if we actually sit back and observe, we might find that, oh, maybe I'm not that way, or maybe some things that I really prided myself on being, I've lost touch with, or and I think, like you said, the big thing is that it doesn't mean you're going to have a bad life or you're a bad person. It's just maybe something you have to work on.
Right, and there is, your mom was wise in that there's consequences to every behavior change,
Mm.
and nothing's all good or bad. And when we make changes, we do get pushback from the people in our lives. It doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to do, but when we slow down and observe, we can see, okay, what would I like to do about this, and prepare ourselves for the possible consequences, but keep going.
Mm.
So, as a pleaser, for example, say if you are confronting friends that maybe you feel are, or maybe we'll use an example. You had a friend that always was taking your homework and copying it, and you really didn't like that. So you tell the friend, listen, I really don't like when you do that. You're going to have to start doing your own homework. And you made a conscious decision. You might, get pushback for her at first. Does that mean that was the wrong thing to do? No.
Mm.
If you said it in the best way you could and you're being honest, that's great. You're working towards being more of a self and less of a people pleaser, but you're not going to get the same responses from people in your life that you're used to. So then it's about managing anxiety around that as well, and not thinking that you're a bad person or did something wrong because the other person reacted badly.
Mm-hmm. And you spoke about your own experience with pleasing and your family dynamic. Is that part of what propelled you to do the work you do now, to become a therapist?
Yeah, 100%. Now I see that. I didn't realize. I mean, I was very into learning about the mind, the brain, human relationships, but I was so into wanting to be a caretaker, helping people. I wanted to take everybody's pain away. And those conceptions were all wrong of how, helpful therapy works.
Mm.
And I think I dived into it maybe for the wrong reasons, but later I came out really learning how I could make changes and then also be useful and helpful to others in their experiences. So it definitely gave me more than I realized it would. I don't know who I'd be without becoming a therapist and doing the work that I do, but I for sure focused on certain areas based on my own experience. And I always write about things that not only do I see in clients or in my research, but things I've actually experienced
Mm-hmm.
myself and made changes
Mm.
myself. And I know how hard it is.
Yeah. How do you find that that you've needed to find ways of protecting yourself when talking with clients who maybe have gone through similar things that you have in your life?
No, not anymore because I do feel healed and moved
Mm.
on. Of course, maybe if things bring up, I do find it interesting, and I'm sure you see sometimes too in TV shows or on the radio or even with clients or friends. Sometimes comes up that maybe you should be taking a look at yourself. So I might be going through something in real time, and my client's going through that. I'm like, oh crap, probably should take a look at that in my own life too.
Yeah.
But I'm honest with myself about that and fun. And I don't see, there's going to be challenges. I don't see it as like a end game
Yeah.
type of thing. It's a lifelong thing.
Mm.
And I've like worked a lot on being more self-aware, and I can laugh at myself and and I've put all my stuff out there
Mm-hmm.
for, and I can take a look at myself and laugh about it and say, okay, wait, I should probably work on that too. So it doesn't really trigger me to anything that would hurt me, but maybe say, oh, okay, I'm gonna work with this client and maybe ask them, oh, what do you think you should do about that?
Mm.
And maybe get some no, just
Get some
kidding.
ideas.
Get somebody. I'm like, that's interesting. What would be your best advice for someone? No, I'm just kidding. But so yeah, those are the type of jokes that I might do with clients, and I focus on them though. I don't like to personalize and make it about myself. So the focus is on them, but I do then later say, oh, maybe that's something I could take a look at as well. So
Mm.
more of that shift than anything coming up and it hurting me.
Mm. Has anything about your either the work you do, your experience with your clients, anything that sticks out to you that has surprised you?
Um, well, I think the biggest shift is seeing how resourceful people are. A
Mm.
lot of people think, "Oh, you're a therapist, you must be so drained." And I see people are coming to me that want to see change, that are
Mm-hmm.
motivated, that want to work on themselves. And yes, there's horrible things that have happened and we get through it. I'm not scared of sad emotions or things like that. I do feel for people that have been through horrific experiences, and we can share that space together. I can be empathetic, but also I see the resilience in people. And I just didn't anticipate as a therapist how much strength I would see and how much it would give me, more appreciation for people, relationships, and what they go through versus like the negative side. People must think, oh,
Mm.
there are people. Some people still have that notion. Oh, you see crazy people. Like nobody I see is crazy.
Yeah.
It's everybody is just regular people going through regular like if we all take a look at our own lives, like we're all a little bit
Right.
crazy. So let's not judge people.
Right.
And but I see people that are just strong and intelligent and willing to wanting to take a look and function better in their lives.
Mm.
And And that I think was the surprise for me, is just like that shift from, oh, I'm going to help people, I'm going to make them better, to I'm going to see people that have been through stuff but want to make changes and grow and, be better for themselves and future generations and for their families.
That's really beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I don't always, but I sometimes do ask, particularly when I interview therapists, how do you take care of your own mental health? How do you self-care?
Well, I found it difficult with having kids, pandemic work. So, like this summer, for example, I've been taking it more easy. I set like a client maximum.
Mm,
And when I do get emails, I'm very appreciative that people would like to see me, but I'll tell them I'm not going to be available till September. And I give them referrals if they'd like, or they can wait.
mm-hmm,
Or resources, that way. So, like for this summer, I have, since my kids finally went, they're in camp, and I've been home with two kids trying to work. It was very overwhelming. I paid attention to my body, and I said, you know what, this summer I released a book, and I'm gonna now just do some interviews, and I'm really gonna take it easy this summer while the
mm-hmm,
kids are in camp, and have some time for me, which might look like lunch with a friend or family I haven't seen in a while. Going for a facial. I've been making an effort to work out, just sit outside and read a book, in
mm-hmm.
quiet.
Yeah,
Nerdy thing,
yeah.
So that's really, this summer has been my like focusing on me when my kids are in camp, and doing a little work, because I really needed that after this year. So just paying attention to myself, and when I'm overwhelmed, and saying, okay, what can I do that's realistic to my situation? Of course, I spoke to my husband about it, and we came up with a plan, and just being honest,
Mm-hmm.
and saying, this is what I really need right now, because I'm feeling burnt out, and I'm not being my best self or my best parent right now. So,
Yeah. And I always like to get into the how of actually making it happen. And again, it sounds like what I'm hearing is, communicating to those around you who will be helpful, who are an integral part of the system, right? Your husband, he's part of the family with your kids, and just communicating what you need, setting the boundaries with work. And as far as some of those other things you mentioned, lunch, reading books, do you find that you actually need to schedule that time, or is it just, what, I've made the time because I've opened my calendar and I just naturally now pick up the things that I enjoy?
I have to schedule it,
Yeah.
especially with kids, and
Yeah.
like the time they're in camp, and my family, like they're going to have a little break. So I've already called my resources of my family. And I think I would never have done that in the past.
Mm.
Part of my work with clients is seeing who their resources are, working on them with learning how to reach for help. And I told my family, like, they're going to have like a 2-week break. Let's schedule where everybody maybe can like help me out a little, so I could still maybe see some clients or have a
Mm-hmm.
little time,
Mm-hmm.
so thinking ahead and scheduling things, and knowing your resources and your situation. And I think that's hard for people. I would have never admitted in the past that maybe I need some help too, or sometimes it's overwhelming, but now I can openly admit, thinking of staying home with my kids now after a year for 2 weeks
I know. I know.
is a very stressful for my brain.
I know.
So I'm like planning it out so
I
I can
know.
admit that. I'm like, I just did it. I will not survive 2 weeks now. So somebody
I
calling all my
know.
resources.
I know. It
South
is
Africa,
funny.
you're coming over. Who
I
wants
know.
to
I know. It's like an SOS. Like, okay. I know. It is funny. I mean, after like the whole quarantine, and like the strict quarantine and the whole year of it, I looked back and I don't, I mean, I know we had no choice, but it's remarkable that we got through it. And you're 100% on the money. I had about 2 weeks of time where my daughter's one school ended before the other one started, and it was like those 2 weeks felt like an eternity. It was brutal. And it was almost like I was almost triggered by my own past experience. It was like, oh my God, this is what this felt like in March of 2020. Like, I'm right back there.
I feel like we were like on survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
And for sure, we just did what we had to, grinded, and, then you get a taste of, having a life again. And
Yep.
it's hard to think that, because it takes a lot of entertaining. You said, I think I have young kids also,
Yeah.
a 2 and a 6-year-old, and you have.
I have a 1.5 and a 3.5-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you have it definitely tougher than I do. Maybe.
Maybe. I know. I mean, we all are just have our own, right? Like our own, I don't know. It's tough for all of us. Whatever situation you're in with these kids up our butts for the last 2 years now,
For
practically. Sure. Oh my goodness. And so I I love that you actually speak of your family member as resources, but you do actually have a number of tangible resources for people. Your website is just loaded, not only with your books, but with different workbooks. You want to talk a little bit about your newest book?
Sure. I just released, it's called the Forgiveness Workbook, and it's my first workbook. I really love it because it has a lot of different activities. I put, important content, but I also have the activities to really help people apply the ideas to their lives, whether it's journal prompts, quizzes, and I try to make them fun, interactive. Basically, like if someone wants to go to therapy, but maybe they don't have the resources or the time or whatnot, it could be, your own way of doing therapy. Some of the type of questions I might ask you, and stuff like that. It has you look at your own family history and things. So I see, unresolved issues or unforgiveness coming up a lot in people's lives, and also misconceptions about what forgiveness looks like. So I felt like that would be an important thing to write about.
Yeah, and you have one about people pleasing and another about anxiety, correct?
Yes, I have When It's Never About You, which was my first book, guided towards people pleasers, then Anxious for Answers. And I also have a book called It's Within You, which I co-wrote with a rabbi, which it's not religious. It's more how to kind of live life from yourself and make changes from within versus trying to make other people change, and knowing your own worth as a person. And there's a little bit of some, quotes, spiritual quotes, but it's not so religious. There's a lot of useful information in there as well.
So it's not religious, but there is, I feel like I heard an interview you did more specifically about that book where there are significant ties to your faith and that principle, though, correct?
Right. Since I co-wrote it with, he's a Chabad rabbi, which they tend to lean towards more spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So of course there is references to God and the scriptures, but it just shows how much a lot of what we're finding in psychology or our own research, how much it fits with what already ancient spiritual wisdom knew, which I had no idea. I grew up Jewish, but I wasn't religious.
Yeah.
And I just happened to enjoy how this rabbi spoke and his information on his website, and we really connected with our work. And I couldn't believe how similar it was.
Wow.
The behind the scenes. So yeah, of course there's references to Judaism, but I think anyone could utilize the principles without feeling like they need to be a certain religion. And he's a very open rabbi that's very inclusive of everybody.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating, actually. I am glad you clarified that, someone shouldn't feel like they can't read it or that it wouldn't apply to them, but I do think that it's just interesting in itself that connection is there.
Right. Yeah. Me too. I thought it was awesome. Yeah.
think I'm going to have to look into that one because I already got the workbooks.
Okay.
But that one is still on the list. So anyway, is there anything that you would have asked yourself that I didn't think to, or anything else that you want to make sure people hear from you today?
Well, one thing I think sometimes when I say for people to look at their own part in their relationships or observe themselves, they tend to think of that as taking blame. But I always want, and especially for pleasers, since they do already inadvertently take on all the blame of relationships, or they feel like it's, they don't see it really as 50-50, they put it all on themselves. When you're really focusing on you and seeing your part, it's not to take blame. It's just to see where you can make changes or how you can relate to people differently, so you can see how the relationships are reciprocal, and how other people can also take responsibility for themselves and their part of the relationship as well. So I would just like to clarify that distinction between focusing and taking responsibility for your part versus taking the blame.
Yeah. And really, our responsibility for our part is all we can really control, right? I mean, we can't we can't put too much energy into what other people are doing.
Exactly. And it's such a simple idea, but it's a very hard one to grasp and apply to our relationship, something that I myself forget about at times when I'm blaming my husband for things. So
Yes. Yes.
I'm like, no, it's your fault.
No,
Wait,
I know.
Eileen.
I know.
What is your part?
Right.
No, it's his fault. But yeah, so it's something that is simple. Obviously we can only have control over ourselves, but we sometimes forget that.
Yeah.
And especially when we're upset. So for sure.
Yeah, I've heard you say that your brain gets hijacked when you're upset. I love that.
For sure. When we're upset, our brain gets hijacked by our amygdala. And it's not so helpful. So it's best to do our best thinking when we're calm and clear.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. This was so informative, and I really appreciate your time. And I encourage everyone to go to your website. It's dreileen.com, correct?
Right.
And I mean, there's just a wealth of resources and blog posts and books and just a ton of information there. If you have more questions, you can certainly follow Dr. Ilene on all of her social media platforms, which I will link in the show notes. And I so appreciate your time. This was so great. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the platform.
All right, so it's probably pretty obvious, but I was essentially treating that interview as a personal therapy session to conclude whether or not I am, in fact, a people pleaser. So, what do you think? Am I? Are you? After hearing that, are you resonating with any of the tendencies, behaviors, thought processes, family trauma? I don't know. To me, it seems like people pleasing seems to play the long game. Like everything seems okay, it seems like it's working out, but with each little knock on the not so okay door, feelings towards people pleasing get pushed down and down until they have to explode out. So I really love that Dr. Ilene made sure to remind us a few times that whether it's people pleasing or not, start paying attention to your life, your thoughts, your mood, and ask yourself, is this working for me? Am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Am I thriving? And if I'm not, what's going on? So Dr. Ilene has several workbooks that can help you navigate these questions. So as I mentioned on the show, please go to her website, check her out on Amazon, wherever. Just get your hands on something she's written and start. And we recorded this over the summer, still both, as you heard, feeling pretty raw from the COVID-19 quarantine. But I'm honestly so glad for the reminder of what that was like, because I'm sitting here now, almost to 2022, thinking about how we don't have time to waste. I know it's cliche, but it's cliche because it's true. Dr. Ilene's message is clear. Tune into yourself. Figure out what you want and need, set some boundaries, and live your life for yourself. I know it's not that simple, and yet somehow it has to be. So that being said, she answered plenty of my but how questions, but her books will take deeper dives into everything you need to know. So Thank you, Dr. Ilene, and thank you for listening. And I'm out of here. I've recorded this intro and outro more times than I want to admit, so I'm out. I love you, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.